in 2017 by Philippine police in Quezon City. Nanay Lore is also a member of the human rights group Rise Up for Life and for Rights, an organization of activists and families of drug war victims that was formed in 2016 in response to the upsurge in so-called drug-related killings under Duterte. Nanay Lore will be assisted by Deaconess Ruby Lynn Litau, a human rights activist and the current coordinator of Rise Up for Life and for Rights. So please welcome Nanay Lore.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nanay Lore from Rise Up for Life and for Rights. I would like to prepare to speak in Filipino language so that I can express well what I want to say. And Deaconess Robelin will translate in English. Ang pag-aresto kay Duterte ay isang unang hakbang para makamit ng mga biktima ang justisya.
According to Nanay Lore, the arrest of Duterte is the first step for the families of victims to have justice.
Wini-welcome namin ang arrest warrant, ang pag-aresto, at na-excite kami at naging masaya dahil nakadetine na siya sa The Hague.
So when the news came that Duterte will be arrested, Nanay Lore, together with the other families, are excited and welcome this action of the ICC. And now he is in The Hague, Netherlands.
Sa katunayan po ay ang mga pamilya ng Rise Up for Life and for Rights ay sobrang masaya at walang mapagsidlan ng aming kasiyahan kahit alam namin na hindi pa ito ganap.
Okay, according to Nanay Lore, together with the families, they are very happy with this news last week because their excitement, their happiness is very fulfilling for Duterte to be arrested.
Handa po kaming ipagpatuloy ang laban sa kabila ng mga paninira ng kampo ng mga Duterte.
Okay. Nanay Lore is saying that she is prepared to continue the fight, tuloy ang laban, especially now that there are many things happening. We're in the group of Duterte spreading all kinds of stories against the victims' families, because the victims here are the families whose loved ones have been killed.
Ako po sa personal kong karanasan sa kasalukuyan ay may mga kumakalat na isang post na napakasama ng mga sinasabi.
Right now, Nanay Lore is receiving bad news about her sons by being vocal to this for looking for justice. There are bashers in the social media, and she is somewhat affected by these bashers, but still she opts to continue the fight for justice.
Katunayan po, isang gabi na hindi ako nakatulog. Sa pagkabahala, bakit nila ginagawa sa akin?
Actually, there were nights that she was not able to sleep because of receiving all this kind of negative news and negative posts in the social media.
Ang nakasaad po sa post ay kapitbahay ko lang daw po siya, pero hindi ko naman siya kilala dahil hindi naman nagpakilala yung nag-post. Ngunit sa kabila ng mga pangyayari, tuloy pa din ako sa pagdalo ng meeting at nagsasalita.
According to her, the person who is putting bad news is that he is their neighbors, and she knows Nanay Lore and her sons, but still she was not able to identify who was that people spreading lies and spreading posts against against Nanay Lore?
Sa katunayan po, kaming mga nanay ng Rise Up na nagsasalita ay may mga kapariha ding banta, may mga kaparihang post. Kaya sobra po kaming nababahala. Pero ang aking mga anak at mga iba ring mga kaibigan at kakilala ay sumusuporta din sila sa aming laban.
As of now, it's not only Nanay Lore who's receiving bad and negative posts to get other families are also receiving negative posts, especially those families who were able to publicly present their fight for justice. Different forms are being used to the families for them to shut up, to stop what they are doing. But still, the families are ready, and amidst this kind of social media bashers, especially now we are monitoring the bashers. So right now, that's our overwhelming experience right now since last week.
Ang nakakalungkot pa nga po ay mga kadugo ko pa, ang mga nagsasalita sa akin ng mga masasama. Kaya siyempre para sa aming mga biktima, sobra kaming nahihirapan, mabigat sa pakiramdam.
Okay. So some of them are receiving this kind of bashing to their relatives. So it's very sad that some of their families are not supportive for this cause. But still, there are also some who are supporting and sending messages of support and sending messages of inspiration to the family. So those kind of mixed emotions. So yeah,
Kahit mabigat sa pakiramdam ay patuloy pa rin ako sa laban. Kasi kung hindi ako lalaban, sino pa? Talo ako, talo kami. Kaya biglang pumasok sa isip ko na mga biktima na nga kami, binibiktima pa kaming muli. Dahil ang pronouncement ni Duterte, siya yung biktima. Pero ang totoong biktima, kaming mga pamilya ng mga pinaslang.
so Nanay Lore is emphasized that the real victims here are the families who lost their loved ones and not Duterte, as being shown by Duterte supporters in the social media. So given this continuing negative and then bad posting to the families who spoke up, they still decided to continue the fight. They are the victims and not Duterte. And Nanay is saying they are victims, and right now they are being revictimization with this kind of things going on.
Samantalang si Duterte ay inaresto ng maayos. Binigyan siya ng due process. Binasahan siya ng lahat ng karapatan at ibinigay sa kanya. Ngayon, kaming na hindi namin na-enjoy yung ganong karapatan at ganong pag-imbestiga, yun ang ipinagkait sa mga biktima, yung due process na na-enjoy ngayon ni Duterte. Napaka-special niya kung tutuusin doon sa The Hague. Pero marami pa ring reklamo yung mga kampo niya.
So Nanay Lore is saying Duterte experienced due process. She was given ample time to present herself. And then right now in The Hague, we are saying that he is receiving good treatment. All due process is given to him, unlike the families whose loved ones have been killed. They were not given time to present themselves. They just being killed. So no due process have been made to the families killed, to the members of the families being killed.
Kaya ang pag-grant ng interim release kay Duterte at makauwi dito sa Pilipinas ay napakalaking banta ng seguridad sa aming buhay ng mga biktimang lumalaban para sa hustisya sa aming mga kaanak. Hinding-hindi kami papayag.
Okay, so when there is a news that Duterte can avail of the interim release, Nanay Lore, together with the families, is a threat to the families and to the supporters, because right now he is not here, but still the families are being threatened. What more if he will be allowed to come in to bring back here in the Philippines? So that's why the families are saying they will not allow that to happen. So Duterte must stay in the Hague to present himself and to go into the due process afforded by the International Criminal
Well, itself. Kaya kaming mga pamilyang biktima ay makikipagtulungan sa pagpapahayag para sa pagpapanagot kay Duterte at sa lahat ng kanyang mga general, kapulisan, gayon din ang lahat ng mga sangkot sa kanyang peking war on drugs. Nais din naming panagutin si Marcos at hilingin ang pagbalik natin sa pagiging miyembro ng ICC.
So Nanay Lore is saying the families are ready to shed light on what's happening in this war on drugs, so that Duterte will be held accountable to what he did during his presidency, together with his generals. And so we're also calling the Philippines, to the government of Marcos, to rejoin the International Criminal Court.
At sabi ko na din na yun nga na ang pag-aresto kay Duterte ay unang hakbang patungo sa pagkamit namin ng hustisya. Kaya kami po ay nagpapasalamat sa ganitong pagkakataon na binigay sa amin upang ipahayag kung ano yung tunay naming damdamin ng mga biktima. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Okay, so we are saying together with the mothers, Rise Up, now speaking as in behalf of Rise Up for Life and for Rights as the advocates, we thank you for this opportunity, and we continue to thank you, the ICHRP, for being with us throughout this journey. We have had many instances where we were able to share what is happening, the situation here in the Philippines, and thank you for being with us. And hopefully, until it's just the beginning. So we continue to fight for justice together with the families. So thank you.
Salamat po sa yon. We're going to keep on the journey with you, Nanay Lore and Rubilin. I'd like to introduce Brandon Lee as our next speaker. Brandon is a Chinese American from San Francisco who moved to the Philippines in 2010 to live and work with the Igorot indigenous people in the Cordillera region. He was a volunteer for the Ifugao Peasant Movement, a human rights worker with the Cordillera Human Rights Alliance, and the Ifugao correspondent for the alternative newspaper Northern Dispatch Weekly. On August 6, 2019, Brandon became the first US citizen targeted by former President Rodrigo Duterte when he was shot 4 times by soldiers from the 54th Infantry Battalion in front of his house. The attack left him permanently paralyzed as a quadriplegic, paralyzed in his hands and from the chest down, but they did not silence Brandon. He continues to use his voice to advocate for human rights as chairperson of the ICHRP United States chapter. So over to you, Brandon. Welcome.
Good morning and good evening to those joining around the world. Thank you for listening to our testimony. Duterte's arrest is a big step toward justice for the thousands of victims. We know that his arrest is the product of the Filipino people's collective struggle for accountability and justice. Let there be no mistake. The international community will be closely watching this. ICHRP will continue to support the Filipino people demand for justice and accountability from Duterte and all his cronies in the government, military, and police. Duterte's arrest is deeply personal to me as one of over 30,000 victims of his bloody regime. While the world knows about the atrocities of his war on drugs, which is really a war on the poor. Under Duterte's regime, there were also a lot of killings of civilians and revolutionaries from his counterinsurgency plan, which violated human rights and international humanitarian law. From my experience, many of the killings happen in the rural areas, especially indigenous and impoverished communities, to permanently silence the people defending their land and livelihood. Duterte's crackdown on dissent is eerily similar to his crackdown on his war on drugs against the poor. His shoot-to-kill order did not just target suspected drug users. He targeted activists too. I myself survived the attempted assassination, which caused severe trauma to me and my family. Duterte's lesser-known war on dissent, especially in the countryside of the Philippines, that terrorized thousands of rural poor peasants and farmers, needs to also be scrutinized under a microscope and put on trial. I documented the human rights violations and abuses of the Philippine military in Ifugao. The Philippine military raped indigenous minors. They threatened, harassed, intimidated, and placed community leaders under surveillance for opposing, criticizing government programs and policies. They forced many indigenous people, peasants, to surrender as MPA rebels. They bombed and militarized communities. They dropped the international restricted bomb, white phosphorus, in the indigenous communal forest in the province of Abra in 2017, and most recently in Kalinga in 2023. They red tagged us as communist terrorists, and when that did not stop and deter our organizing work, they attempt to silence us as they did to Ricardo Mayumi, an indigenous leader in Ifugao, killed for defending his community from being damned. He was killed. Duterte is now begging for the people's sympathy as an 80-year-old man in custody. But the victims of Duterte and their families were given no sympathy. He ordered the murder of a sick and elderly activist, including 71-year-old peace consultant Randy Ichanes, who was ruthlessly tortured and stabbed to death by state agents in his own apartment, unable to defend himself. Under Duterte, 442 were extrajudicially killed. The bullets that are used in the counterinsurgency operations and that are still embedded in my body were most likely funded by our US government and our tax dollars. In his presidency, Duterte was the #1 human rights violator, enabled by the United States government through the funding, the training, the arming of the Philippine military and police in his bloody counterinsurgency plan, which continues today under Bongbong Marcos, who is the son of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Duterte's failed economic policy of build, 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 which led to kill, kill, kill. He welcomed multinational corporations with open arms, mining, dams, and plantations that threatened the environment, displaced the indigenous and rural communities, and sought to silence anyone who resisted. This is still happening under Bongbong Marcos. I testified at the International People's Tribunal, which found both Duterte and Marcos Jr. guilty of many war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. Duterte must now pay the price and be prosecuted to the fullest extent of international law. Despite his crimes, he continues to enjoy privileges, unlike those who were violently arrested, tortured, and detained in inhumane conditions under his regime. While victims suffer, Duterte remains free from the same suffering he inflicted upon countless victims, even today after his arrest. Let us not also forget that the present Marcos administration is no different from Duterte. In fact, indigenous people under this current administration are experiencing worse human rights violation with the weaponization of the anti-terror law and the Terrorist Financing Prevention and Suppression Act against indigenous activists, and the upsurge of destructive mining and energy projects in their land. This should only be the beginning with his arrest. We demand full accountability and justice for all victims of Duterte's bloody drug war, his war against the people, and his relentless attacks on indigenous people, human rights defenders, and activists. We also hold his accomplices, including the military and police, accountable, as well as the current Marcos Jr. administration, which continues Duterte's tyrannical rule, including Executive Order 70, which established the National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict, that has red tagged so many civilians and activists, that put so many of our lives in danger. Let us continue to demand that the U.S. stop funding the military and police in the Philippines who are committing atrocities. Justice for all human rights defenders killed and persecuted under Duterte's regime. Justice for all victims of Duterte's drug war. Stop U.S.-backed war crimes. Hold Duterte and his accomplices accountable. End impunity now. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you so much. I introduce our next speaker. It is Janet Rice, a former Australian senator for the Greens Party. She has been a powerful campaigner for justice for people and the planet for more than 4 decades. Janet was a commissioner for Investigate PH and confronted the current president, Marcos Jr., in the Australian Parliament this time last year. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you so much, Brandon, Nane Lore, Deaconess Rubin, for your powerful words this morning. And I just reiterate their words that they and all of the people that were impacted by Duterte's regime are the victims, not Duterte. And it's really disturbing to hear of the families still being threatened by Duterte's supporters right now. President Duterte's arrest is an important first step towards justice after years of pressure from people's organisations. In 2021, Investigate PH was launched as an initiative of peoples from all over the world concerned about the state of human rights in the Philippines, and I served in this project as a commissioner. Investigate PH conducted multiple independent hearings on human rights violations, which substantiated the June 2020 report of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights concerning gross violations of human rights in the Philippines. So the arrest of Duterte is an important victory for the Filipino people, and we want to especially recognise the role of witnesses and the victims who testified in Investigate PH. The arrest of Duterte is one step towards justice, but there are many more steps to come, including the accountability of many other government officials who were involved in executing his war on drugs, and addressing the systems of state violence set up under Duterte that applied war on drug type killings and persecution of activists and human rights defenders. There were some key findings that Investigate PH came up with. It identified 3 wars against the people waged under Duterte. There was the war on poor people in the guise of a war on drugs. There was a war on dissent, and there was a war on the Moro and Indigenous peoples of the Philippines. And these wars continue to this day. In Duterte's war on the poor, police operated under total impunity. They were essentially committing summary executions without due process, often creating false evidence and obstructing the justice process. And in Duterte's war on dissent, and on the Moro and Indigenous peoples, Duterte created two key machineries of terror: the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC, and the anti-terrorism law. And these mechanisms served as a foundation for the weaponisation of the courts against dissent, and for the military and the police to bypass the courts to violate rights, both of which perpetuate and institutionalise impunity. Under Duterte, the anti-terror law and the NTF-LCAC institutionalised the use of terrorism as a catch-all to criminalise any political opposition. And the NTF-LCAC suppression, it extends to religious institutions like the United Church of Christ of the Philippines, Haran Centre in Davao City, which has been subjected to harassment under financial provisions of anti-terror money laundering. And Haran's bank accounts were frozen as a punishment for serving as a refuge for Indigenous Lumad who were displaced by their communities by militarisation. And these policies and laws, together with the red tagging, resulted in violations of international humanitarian law, as was seen in the killing of civilians, the mistreatment of captured New People's Army combatants, and the continued killing of National Democratic Front of the Philippines peace consultants, who are a protected category of persons under the Joint Agreement on Security and Immunity Guarantees agreement between the Filipino government and the NDFP, in addition to being protected as non-combatants under international humanitarian law. So in the end, Investigate PH found the crimes of lack of accountability. Investigate PH found the lack of accountability and that domestic measures and remedies for crimes allegedly orchestrated from the highest officers of the state and security services, they have proved totally ineffective, and it required and requires international investigation and solidarity. And this is particularly the case because the mechanisms put in place under Duterte continue to this day, and many of Duterte's cronies continue to live on and operate in impunity today under the Marcos Jr. regime. So we are renewing the call today for the Marcos Jr. regime to abolish the NTF-LCAC and to repeal the anti-terror law. And finally, all of those involved in Duterte's war on drugs must also be arrested and put on trial for their participation in these murders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. We've got a lot of work to do, but we've taken a big step here. Our final speaker is Suzanne Adili. She is a Labour and human rights lawyer based in New York City. She's the recent past president of the National Lawyers Guild of the United States and a member of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. The NLG is a member organization of ICHRP US. Suzanne is a daughter of migrant workers from Jordan who came to New York, and she's a lifelong Palestinian liberation activist. She was a juror for the 2024 International People's Tribunal. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Peter. The jurors of the International People's Tribunal welcome the arrest of former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte on the crime against humanity of murder. In May of 2024, the IPT was convened as a quasi-judicial mechanism where evidence was presented to a panel of jurors to render judgment on specific charges. In this instance, the charges were war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law committed in the conduct of the civil war in the Philippines that were perpetrated by the Duterte and Marcos Jr. regimes, backed by the United States government. As a juror of the IPT, I heard evidence and witness testimonies in multiple independent hearings on human rights violations and war crimes in the Philippines, which substantiated a verdict of guilty under international law concerning crimes against humanity. Victim testimonies provided chilling firsthand accounts of extrajudicial killings, torture, enforced disappearances, and attacks on indigenous communities who were defending their ancestral lands from mining and corporate plunder under President Duterte's regime. More than a dozen peace consultants of the NDF have been murdered by the Marcos and Duterte governments. The tribunal heard specific testimony of the brutal murder of peace consultant Rendell Echenes in his home while he slept in August 2020. No one was held to account for this crime. Witnesses described how public schools for indigenous children in Mindanao have been branded as communist recruitment hubs and were relentlessly targeted, their volunteer teachers killed or slapped with terrorist charges. The tribunal also heard compelling testimony from Janila Castro, who, along with a colleague, Jed Tamano, was kidnapped by the military in September 2023 in Bataan province. After 17 days of interrogation, the two were paraded by the military and NTF-LCAC as NPA surrenderees at a public press conference. It was here that the two recanted their forced confessions and exposed their kidnapping by the military and police. This was another example of non-combatant civilian activists being targeted by the military. Witnesses reported on indiscriminate aerial bombardment and shelling of communities in upland villages in Kalinga province, close to Gawaan Elementary School, putting at risk students and teachers. Another war crime was the murder of 5 NPA combatants in Bohol in February 2024, in which the military tortured and later killed the 5 prisoners of war. The war on the poor continues under Marcos, with 928 reported drug-related killings during the Marcos Jr. administration as of March 7th, 2025. At the beginning of the Marcos administration, data indicates that drug-related violence has persisted at levels similar to those seen under Duterte. Dahas reported 342 drug casualties from July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023, which averages to about 0.9 deaths per day, slightly higher than the 0.8 daily average during Duterte's final year in office. The tribunal further found that even as some U.S. officials outwardly criticized Duterte's brutal drug war, the current counterinsurgency program of the Philippine government is inspired, financed, trained, and supplied by the United States government. Witnesses showed that the U.S. government played a key enabling role, rendering it complicit in these atrocities. These abhorrent crimes, including the killing of civilians, intentional attacks on civilians, indiscriminate warfare causing excessive injury and environmental damage, forced displacement, blocking humanitarian aid, acts of terror against civilians, extrajudicial killings, torture, desecration of the dead, abductions, unlawful detentions, and fabricated charges. Under the ICC's Rome Statute, the U.S. and other nations are also liable for their material assistance in the violation of human rights and international humanitarian law in the Philippines. We laud the arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte and urge a fair and transparent trial without delay. But justice needs to be served on the other principles involved in the Philippines' dirty war on dissent. The current president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., has conducted aerial bombing campaigns against civilian infrastructure in Mindanao, Negros, and Cordillera. The police and military under his government have murdered civilian dissenters and have assassinated numerous peace consultants and some peace negotiating panel members. He continues to commit the same atrocities as his predecessor, and he must be held to account as well. Finally, the United States government is guilty in supporting these alleged war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law, and they must not be allowed to conduct such a policy with impunity. We encourage the United Nations and the ICC to delve more deeply into the crimes against humanity being committed in the Philippines, and to examine not just the crimes of Rodrigo Duterte, but those of the current president, Bongbong Marcos Jr. Marcos, supported by the United States government. These maintain all the instruments and mechanisms of terror employed by the previous regime and continue the attacks on civilians and dissenters, which amount to new war crimes on an ongoing basis. And I'm just going to end by just giving my congratulations to the Filipino people for making this arrest happen.
Thank you very, very much, Suzanne. Those media workers and others in the call, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or be ready to raise your hand on the screen using the Zoom facility. So I'll just make a couple of final remarks and then we'll switch into the Q&A. So we all know that former President Duterte did not personally kill tens of thousands of Filipino civilians. The ICC has information about many other officials of his administration who implemented these illegal, deadly programs. So ICHRP calls for the ICC to issue warrants for the arrest of other perpetrators of these crimes against humanity under Duterte. We allege that these include Lieutenant General Antonio Palade Jr., a former chief of the Southern Luzon Command and chief spokesperson of the anti-FLCAC. In these roles, Palade conducted a red tagging and alleged murder spree. Delfin Negrillo Lorenzana is a retired Filipino Army general who served as Secretary of National Defense in the cabinet of President Rodrigo Duterte, and he was appointed by the president as the administrator of martial law in Mindanao. Eduardo Manahan Año is a Filipino public official and retired Army general who served as the Secretary of the Interior and Local Government from 2018 in the cabinet. And Ronald Bato Marapon de la Rosa is currently serving as a senator of the Philippines. De la Rosa served as the chief of the Philippine National Police and was the chief implementer of the war on drugs. And finally, Hermogenes Cedanya Esperon Jr., a retired Philippine Army general who served as the National Security Advisor in the cabinet of Rodrigo Duterte. Esperon has long been associated with the killing and forced disappearance and torture of hundreds of civilians, including political activists. So ICHRP calls for the abolition of the anti-FLCAC, echoing the call of other speakers here, and the repeal of the anti-terror law, which are mechanisms for crimes against humanity. ICHRP calls for the international people's solidarity and pressure to now escalate on the Marcos Jr. regime. Marcos continues the policy of Duterte and also needs to be held accountable, especially following the verdict of the 2024 International People's Tribunal. ICHRP calls on President Marcos Jr. to fully cooperate with the International Criminal Court in the coming trial of Rodrigo Duterte. And it's clear from this experience of this arrest and the coming trial that the Philippines should rejoin the International Criminal Court properly. So we call for that as well. So having said that, I'd like to thank everybody so far, and let's go to the Q&A. I'll just see what I've got here. So the first question I have for any of the speakers is, does the ICHRP know the status of the Matabato and Las Cañas case, the alleged former gunman of Duterte? Is anybody able to take up that question? Okay. I just go to those people with their hands raised. The first one is John Eric Mendoza. So if he could be unmuted, go ahead, please, John.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can I please address my question to former Senator Janet Rice, Attorney Suzanne, Professor Hill, and Chairman Peter Murphy? Former President Duterte is the first Asian leader who got an ICC arrest warrant. Do you think Duterte's arrest will eventually pave way for the implementation of the arrest warrant of ICC, this time for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Israel leader Benjamin Netanyahu? Thank you.
Does anyone want to take up that one? I'll just start, John. I think that this one, your question is well beyond the scope of the ICHRP people. Of course, we want to see international humanitarian law upheld, and we would like to see the ICC respected by all governments in the world. But we know from this experience we've just discussed this morning that it's up to the people in Palestine and Israel, or in Russia and Ukraine, to work very hard. We know how hard people have to work and persist to get this level of action. So that's, I think, the best answer I can give.
And look, I'm happy just to add a few comments as a human rights activist, that certainly the ICC's arrest of Duterte gives me hope that maybe there is some power in international law remaining, because if you look at the situation with Putin and you look at Netanyahu's sort of genocidal attacks in Palestine, it really is very easy to feel very despairing, and obviously President Trump's attacks on human rights and people right across the world. So for the ICC to have taken this action and arrested Duterte, it gives me hope that international law may in fact continue to have some power.
Thank you, Janet. Any other comment? I'll go now to Job Manahan, who's his hand raised.
Hello, good morning, guys. This is Job Manahan from ABS-CBN News. My question is for Nanay Lori. Is it okay if I speak in English and Tagalog?
Go right ahead, Job.
I didn't understand. Okay. Nanay Lori, how do you feel that families of drug war victims are the target of trolls and pro-Duterte supporters? Do you think this is a setback in your fight against Duterte? In Tagalog, ano yung pakiramdam mo, Nanay Lori, na yung mga drug war victims ay biktima rin ngayon ng trolling? Tapos, ang dami ring fake news na kumakalat sa inyo. Sa tingin nyo ba na parang nadagdagan ba yung problema nyo tungkol dito sa laban nyo kay Pangulong Duterte o dating Pangulong Duterte? Thank you.
Yes po, talagang isang trauma, kumbaga isang dagok na naman yan sa mga biktima, dahil kumbaga na winelcome na nga namin, naging masaya na kami dun sa kanyang pag-aresto, pero ito na naman yung kanyang mga trolls at saka yung mga fake news, yun yung nagpapabigat na naman sa aming damdamin, na personally ako, hindi ako makatulog dahil siyempre natutrauma ako, naalaala ko na paglabas ko baka mamaya mayroong mangharas sa akin, ganun. Kasi pininpoint talaga yung pangalan ko, pati yung lugar ko. Kasi tinawag pa niya akong ate, ha. Sabi kong ganun. Inati niya pa ako, tapos sa baba tinira-tira niya ako na ganun yung mga anak ko, na dapat silang mamatay dahil deserve nila. Tama ba yun? Grabe. Kung sa kanila kaya mangyari yun, ano kayang pakiramdam nila?
So Nanay Lores is expressing here that right now, families are experiencing bashing, negative posts, and then the experience of Nanay Lore is very traumatic. She is saying they are the victims, but right now they are being another issue of victimization. So that's what's happening now. So actually, I'm speaking as Rise Up for Life and for Rights. Last night, some of the volunteers of Rise Up, some of my colleagues went to the community because there is a mother who is experiencing bashing. So we tried to to get the facts and get some details. So right now we are doing that. And while we are having this press conference, there are families, there are sister who is receiving negative posting, and she is very much affected, just like Nanay Lore. She said a while ago she was not able to sleep for almost 2 days because of that posting, because of that social media bashing. So right now, when the families presented themselves to, they talk about their narratives, they talk what's really happened to their families, and right now they tell the truth to the world, and right now they're experiencing that. And we are sure, we identify that those who are doing this are from the Duterte camp. So that's what's happening right now. So we hope you will also join us in exposing this kind of trauma again with this kind of social media platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Rubilin. We have a question in the chat from Maki Pulido. You mentioned that EJK's extrajudicial killings continue under Marcos Jr.'s administration. What cases are these? Can you elaborate? I think this one goes back to you, Rubilin.
Yes, there are also reports in the communities that there are some killings happening in the community. And right now they are saying the illegal drugs did not stop. It continues. So Rise Up now is trying to vet or trying to document those killings. Actually, we had already documented 1 or 2 cases wherein it happened during Marcos' time. So yeah, so this is another work for us, but of course we want to tell what's really happening, especially the victims' families.
Thank you very much, Rubilin. The next question is from Gil Boringer. Go ahead, please, Gil. You need to be unmuted by the tech people.
Yeah, I wanted to add a few words about the ICC. To the best of my memory, no one other than those from the Global South have been prosecuted by the ICC. So we must remember that the law, like other institutions, is quite contradictory. And as Marx and Engels and even Max Weber have pointed out, there is indeed essentially a law for the rich and another for the poor. And I doubt if we'll see Netanyahu, Putin, Trump, even Biden, all war criminals. I doubt if we'll see them in front of the ICC.
Okay. Does any of the panel wish to comment on that point from Gil?
Well, I think that there needs to be effort put into creating the political will globally for Netanyahu to be prosecuted, right? To be arrested. I think similarly, like I think that it means that, you know, all of us within our roles, right, in solidarity with the Filipino struggle, need to continue to build awareness about Duterte's arrest, but also, you know, his legacy, the legacy of the Marcos regime and the role of the United States, so that not only is, you know, the prosecution done transparently and efficiently, but also that it expands beyond kind of like, I think, you know, what I understand is somewhat of the narrowness of the prosecution right now. And I think, you know, the reason that, you know, Duterte is there in the first place comes from like a very strong, I mean, I understand that there are other circumstances, but it comes from a very strong solidarity movement. And similarly, you know, we need to continue to put pressure on governments around the world, and including the West, to make a commitment to not allow Netanyahu to come, to their shores without arrest, but not just Netanyahu, all the members of the Israeli government that have also been issued, a warrant. And we also need to continue to pressure to expand those warrants to, Blinken and Biden, who've also been complicit in that genocide. And now, I mean, I don't think it is, Gil is correct, right? That the ICC has always kind of been a tool to sort of put, getting the global South in line, right? But we have to continue to push, for accountability. And we can only hope that one day that it would result in the arrest of at least one person, who's accountable for this. So it's not just what happens in The Hague. It's not just what happens, amongst lawyers. It's really what's happening in the broader movement.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. We have a question from Ted Regencia. What specific actions are being taken, especially online, to combat the very rapid spread of misinformation targeting the families of the victims of the drug war? So maybe back to you, Rubilin and Nanai.
Okay, so actually, there are statements from the ecumenical community, for example, the church group. They are now issuing statement, the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, and other individuals from the church group are issuing statement in support to the victims' families, especially right now that we are having this kind of a social media bashing. So it's very helpful if we can come up with support statement and showing that the stories of the victims' families are real. They are the real victims here and not Rodrigo Duterte. So we want to show the world that they are the real victims. Actually, since 2018, the families, the mothers are working very hard to tell the truth. And every time there is an opportunity for us, especially the families, to tell their stories, to tell to the whole world what really happened, we do that. We do those kind of things. And right now, when this international ICC thing happened, we are overwhelmed by the response, both the positive. Of course, we are very happy that there are many groups like you who are with us in this fight. And of course, there on the other side, there are also groups who are trying to put down the families. So this is the moment wherein we need your support. This is the moment wherein we can come together. We reason together that this war on drugs brought grave human rights violations, and all the mothers are saying we do not that to happen again. We do not this kind of experience to experience other people, because it's very traumatic. So it will take years and years and years to overcome this situation wherein we are now as Filipinos. So we are very thankful for all the support that we are receiving.
Okay, that's a very important call for more pressure from the international community to protect these families right now. Okay, we have another question from Doug McVeigh, a media worker. To what extent was the so-called war on drugs used as political cover to excuse the murder of activists and other opponents? So someone want to take that one up? I'm pretty sure that the answer is it wasn't used to cover. The government of Rodrigo Duterte loudly proclaimed its great victory in killing all of these civilians who were so poor and unable to at all protect themselves from this attack. And at the same time, he had another machinery at work targeting political activists, as was, I think, conveyed by Suzanne's statement. So, in fact, he wanted to keep that part more quiet. But in the end, it was a similar technique. We know about this tok hang used, that there was no warrant of search even, let alone arrest. The police would just come to the door of a targeted person, knock on the door, and then kill them. So it was absolutely illegal. process, which was protected by the judicial system, unfortunately, in the Philippines, and that's why we end up in the ICC. We've got these other line of hundreds of people, over 400 were political activists who are civilians were killed under Duterte, and we're over 100 already with Marcos Jr. So we do have to deal with all of this. We hope the ICC will face this somehow or other, but we're yet to see how the trial will open up, what scope of evidence and so on. That's one of the reasons why we want the Philippine government to do what its duty is now that there's a trial on, that they give all the documents to the court that would assist in a proper, open, complete trial.
Can I just add
yes,
to what
Janet.
Peter has said? I mean, as a commissioner in the Investigate PH process, I mean, that was the evidence that was given to us, that there was, because there were extrajudicial killings, that Duterte was able to kill anybody that he felt he wanted to get rid of. And so I certainly encourage people to read our Investigate PH report, because there is a lot of evidence there as to exactly the rationale behind all of the killings and all of the attacks on people.
Okay, we've come to 1:30, or in my time it's 10:30 in the morning in the Philippines. There's a couple more comments in the chat. I think I'll just respond to a bit more from Mark Pulido. It's very clear. You're asking about data on drug-related killings under Marcos Jr. Is it state-sponsored? Of course, of course it is. The method is the same. The police demand from local government a list of troublemakers, and then they go out and kill them. So it's a absolutely shocking and heartbreaking and cruel and absolutely ruthless. And so that's why, I guess, one reason why President Marcos is maybe not cooperating much beyond letting them have Duterte for the trial. But right now the Philippines is no longer under the jurisdiction of the ICC. So it's other mechanisms available in the international framework which should come into play, like universal jurisdiction or other forms of sanction regimes, which can be applied if other states are willing to call out this absolutely illegal behavior by another state, the state of the Philippine Republic. That's what we want to see. And of course, we want to see the Philippines back in the ICC. That's really the logic of what's happened now. But it won't happen unless there's a lot of pressure put on, which we can do. We know now that we've got Duterte locked up in The Hague, it can happen. There's some other questions there about the more studies on the EJKs, but you can contact the ICHRP about those to follow up if you'd like. So I think any final comments that Suzanne, Janet, and Nanai and Ruby Lynn would like to make?
Peter, can I make a comment on Maki's
Sorry,
earlier
you're not on the camera. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah. Maki mentioned earlier about the EJ case continuing under Marcos admin. There are currently documented by Karapatan, the human rights organization, 119 political related killings. And that includes one of the peace consultants, Erickson Acosta. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. There's so many cases. I think we'll now say thank you very, very much to our panel of speakers. Thank you. And again, a special message of support to the members of Rise Up for Life and for Rights, and for all the families of the victims. We've heard your call now. We'll try to organize some more specific support right now. So thank you to everybody else who's attended, the media workers. I hope you can convey our information and our attitude really well. And to all the other supporters here who've taken part, we're part of a very important movement which has still got a lot of work to do. So salamat po sa lahat. Tuloy ang laban. The struggle
Salamat po.
continues.
Tuloy ang laban.
Tuloy ang laban.